Good Shabbos. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with just a little bit of a song. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov Mishkanotecha Yisrael, referring to your home, each one of you, wherever you may be living. Ma tovu olecha Yaakov, how good and how beautiful are the Ohalim, the tents of Jacob, Mishkanotecha, the dwelling places of Israel, referring to your home. But it's not just your home individually and specifically, it's your home, your home, your home, connected. And in the context of the original expression, which is in the book of Numbers, it referred to all the households gathered in one place. Nowadays, we have different Jewish homes connecting virtually, but we still need to see ourselves as members of a community. If you have a tallis, you're invited to join with us, putting on Jewish clothing that goes back thousands of years. The last few words are Asher kitchanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahit teif b'tzitzit. Baruch haToranoi Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitchanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahit teif b'tzitzit. And on page 101, on page 101 in the Siddur, again it's the Ma Tovu, this time the full Ma Tovu. And I'm in a Ma Tovu mood this morning because it's September 11th. And I want us to remember what it means for all of our homes to be united. All of us, each in his or her own private place, to be connected, to be more than a group, but unified. On this day, our nation was attacked in a vicious and criminal way that we had never experienced and never anticipated. And it has changed all of our lives over these past 20 years. But we are still a community. We are still a people. We are still a society. And we have to focus on, the strength and the matovu, the goodness, the beauty, which is at the core of America. The potential that we have as a society. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael v'ani berov chasdecha ovo veitecha eshtachave el heichal kodshecha b'yiratecha Adonai ahavti mon beitecha umakom mishkan kvodecha v'ani eshtachave v'yakra evracha lifnei Adonai osi v'ani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon Elohim berov chasdecha aneni b'med yishecha Aneni, God answer me. Be'emet, in truth, Yishecha, bring your healing and your help to me. You are invited to rise. The early morning blessings, Birchot HaShachar, found on pages 103 and 104. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasech v'bina lahavchin ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani b'tzamo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. 104. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kifufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokaha aretz alamoyim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asali kol tzarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten le'ef koach. Bend our will and our desires to your service. I don't think most people nowadays talk in this style or with these words, bending our will and our desires to the service of someone else. American life always asserts the freedom of the individual to make his or her own decision specifically. Judaism asserts that each person, in my opinion, is handmade in the image of God. And therefore every single person is unique, precious beyond compare. Each person is equated with an entire universe. Literally at the top of the chain of any type, much more than the food chain. But Judaism also teaches that we are subservient to God. And we are to see ourselves in a posture of humility and of need. And the more I experience in our shared world, the more I see in our shared lives, the more I realize that there is great comfort in acknowledging that I am not the end-all and be-all, and that I do serve and interact with something far greater than the universe. In a way, it's reassuring. Bend our will and our desires to your service. It's reassuring to know that my deeds matter to the originator of the cosmos. And when I succeed and excel, I'm making a difference. And when I fail, I need to step up my game. Baruch atah Adonai melech hasamah Yisrael. The Psalm for Shabbat on page 112. It is good to thank you, Adonai, and good to sing to your name, Most High, to proclaim your love at daybreak, your faithfulness each night. Finger the lute, pluck the harp, let the sound of the lyre rise up. You gladden me with your deeds, Adonai, and I shall sing of your handiwork. How wonderful are your works, Adonai, how subtle your designs. The arrogant do not understand, the fool does not comprehend this. The wicked flourish like grass, and every evildoer blossoms, only to be destroyed forever. But you, Adonai, are exalted. for all time. Surely your enemies, Adonai, surely your enemies will perish. All who commit evil will be scattered. As a wild bull raises up its horn, you raised my head high, anointed it with fresh oil. As my enemies gather against me, my gaze remains steady, for my ears listen and hear. The righteous flourish like the date palm, thrive like a cedar in Lebanon. Planted in the house of Adonai, the righteous flourish in our God's courtyards. O dinuvim besevod deshenim vranim yu lagid kisharnoi turlola tabo. And on the bottom of page 113, again, the psalm we've been reciting for the past 35 days. And typically I introduce the first section and we sing Achat Sha'alti, but today I want to look at the last 2 or 3 lines of this psalm, which defines the month prior to Rosh Hashanah and then the next 3 weeks. It's the last stanza. If only I could trust that I would see God's goodness in the land of the living. If only I would actually see it. I need to see it. And there are times when I'm afraid that I'm not seeing God's goodness here before me in my own eyes. But I need to see it. And then there's the response to that query. Place your hope in Adonai. Be strong and take courage and place your hope in Adonai. The last 2 lines are the response to the question. The last 2 lines are saying, hold on and see yourself, again, as handmade by God. And God cares about you. And each one of us will feel and sense the presence of God. Hold on and take courage. Take courage. At the bottom of page 120, it's the very last stanza. This is a psalm, it's Psalm 30, we typically skip this. I abbreviate the service on Saturday morning. I don't want you to feel that you're in services interminably, so I do abbreviate the service. And this is recited typically before the Baruch Shamar every single day of the year. Look at the last stanza, again, thinking about September 11th. You turned my mourning into a dance for me. You undid my sackcloth, typically worn on mourning occasions. You undid my sackcloth and girded me with joy, that I might sing of your joy, of your glory, and not be silent. Adonai, my God, I thank you always. God, when I'm with you and close to you, you transform moments of sorrow and sadness into moments of dancing and joy. And again, I need that message on this day. Baruch Shamar on page 122. Baruch Shamar v'haya ha'olam Baruch hu Baruch oseh v'reshit Baruch omer v'yoseh Baruch gozer u'mekayim Baruch merachem al haaretz Baruch merachem al habriot Baruch mishalem sachar tov lireov Baruch chalad v'kayom lo netzach Baruch podeh u'matzil Baruch shemo. The singular one who gives life to the world, the sovereign who is praised and glorified forever and ever. This is your great name. Baruch atah Adonai, sovereign, celebrated with songs of praise. Yachid Cheho Olamim Melech Mishbach Umfawar Adeyat Shemo Hagadol Baruch Atarnoi Melech Malabati Ishbachot. Ashrei is on page 136, and Ashrei is translated differently in various Siddurim, various prayer books. The Siddur that I grew up on translates Ashrei as happy. This Siddur translates it as joyous. They both work, but it's not happy birthday happy. It's more a sense of, as I said before, contentment, satisfaction, fulfillment, even being perhaps even keeled. I call it spiritual equilibrium. A sense of deep, deep contentment in terms of where am I in the world? How am I in the world? And perhaps it's this opening phrase, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, content, spiritually equilibrialized, I just made a word up, is one who is dwelling in God's house. How do I get to be in God's house? I think it's a lifelong challenge in terms of my behavior. My behavior leads to perspective. We once said in our Tanakh study class decades ago, behavior leads to belief. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yalucha Salo Ashrei Ha'am Shekochalo Ashrei Ha'am Shernoi Elohov Tehillah LeDavid Aramimcha Elohai HaMelech V'avarcha Shimcha Leolam Voed B'chol Yom Avarcheka V'ahalla Shimcha Leolam Voed Gadol Arnoi Umhalol Ma'od V'lig Duato Ein Cheker Dor Lador Yeshabach Masecha Ugvurotecha Yagidu Hadar Kavod Hodecha V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha Ve'ezus Norotecha Yomero Ugudu Latecha Asapreno Zecherav Tuvecha Yabiu V'tzit Katcha Yiranenu Chanun Rachum Adonai Erech Apayim Ugdol Chassid Tov Adonai Lakol Rachamav Al Kol Ma'asav Yoducha Adonai Kol Ma'asecha V'chasidecha Yivarchucha Kavod Malchutcha Yomero Ugvod Ratacha Yidaberu Lahodia Livnei Hadam Gvurotav Kavod Hadar Malchuto Malchutecha Malchut Kol Olamim Umem Shaltecha B'chol Dor V'Ador Somech Adonai L'chol Hanoflim V'Zokef L'chol Hakfufim Enei Chol Elecha Yisaberu V'Ata Noten Lahem Et Achlam Be'ito Poteach Et Yadecha Umaspia L'chol Charatzon Tzadik Adonai B'chol Drachov V'Chasid B'chol Ma'asov Karov Adonai L'chol Korov L'chol Asher Yikruhu V'emet Ritzon Yireav Yaseh V'yet Shabbatam Yishma V'yoshiyem Shomer Adonai Et Kol Ohavav V'yet Kol Harshaim Yashmid Tihilat Adonai Yidaber Pi V'varech Kol Basar Shem Kachal Elam Voed V'anachnu Nevarech Yah Me'atav Yad Olam Hallelujah. On page 138, I'm introducing you to a psalm today that normally we skip in terms of length of time, but today I need to say this psalm, and I hope you give me a moment to explain why. Again, I say this psalm every single day, and it's the proximity of the different elements, one to the next within the poem, the religious poem, the Tehillah, the psalm, that takes hold of me every single day. How good to sing to our God sweet and delightful words of praise, which means that my words matter. Adonai will rebuild Yerushalayim, gather in the dispersed people of Israel. The one who heals the brokenhearted and binds their wounds. And the same word, binds their wounds, in the ancient days, 3,000 years ago, now in modern Hebrew, is used to describe a battlefield medic. That's how close God is. God's literally applying bandages to somebody wounded. The one who counts the stars and names each and every one of them. How often have you and I looked up at the sky on a clear night and seen a number of them? And have you ever just pretended, even for a moment, to start counting a few? And of course, within a moment or two, I know I can't manage. I always say, did I count that one or not? Even if it's just a little bit of a section of the sky. This sense of vastness. And it's this vastness which is integrated with God's being close enough to put a bandage on somebody who's wounded. That takes hold of me every single day. It is our great sovereign, infinitely powerful. God's designs are beyond recounting. Adonai gives heart to the humble and throws the wicked to the ground. Call out to Adonai in thanksgiving, and with the music of the lyre sing to God, who covers the heavens with clouds, providing rain for the earth, that grass may flourish on the hillsides, food for livestock, and for the ravens crying nestlings. God feeds the animals and the birds individually. Victorious chariots do not please God, nor is the warrior's strong arms that God desires. Adonai desires those who revere the divine, those who look to God's love and kindness. What matters to God is that you and I emulate kindness of God in this world between ourselves and one another. O Yerushalayim, sing the praises of Adonai. Tzion, celebrate your God, for God has strengthened the posts of your gates. Blessed your children within, brought peace to your borders, and satisfied you with the fat of the harvest. Halavai may it be so. Our depths of prayer. God sends the divine word to earth. How quickly these commands are obeyed. Snow piles up like fleece. Frost spreads like ash. Hailstones are tossed like crumbs. Who could withstand the cold? That's the power of God. Then word is sent for the ice to melt. Winds cease blowing and water flows. God is responsible for the laws of physics in our world. God enunciates commands to Jacob. God speaks commands to Jacob, precepts and just decrees to the people of Israel. No other nation has been so provided. They do not know of God's just decrees. Praise God, hallelujah. The specificity and uniqueness of the relationship between God and Israel. Page 148. Yishtabach Shimcha Lord Malkeinu Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol HaKadosh B'Shamayim U'Ba'aretz Ki Lecha Noeh Adonai Eloheinu V'Eloi Avotenu V'Imotenu Shir U'Shvacha Halel V'Zimra Ozu Memshala Netzach Gedula U'Gvura Tehila V'Tiferet Kedusha U'Malchut Brachot V'Raot Me'ata V'Ad Olam Baruch atah Adonai, El melech gadol v'tishbachot, El hodot, Adonai niflot, Habocher b'shirei zimra, Melech elchei olamim. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbo. Amen. Be'alma divrach hirtevim l'chmachotei b'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayedecho beit Yisrael b'agala u'vizman kariv imru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbo mevarach lo memayo yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitman v'yinaseh v'yithadar v'yitadar V'talal Shmei Kedusha Brechu Le'ela U'Le'ela Min Kol Berchata V'Shirata Tushbechata V'Nechamata Da'amiram Yom V'Imro. Amen. We rise. The Baruch Hu, page 149. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Voed. Top of 150. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or vorech choshech oseh shalom uvarei et hakol. We are seated. The English of this blessing is, blessed are you, God, sovereign of time and space, forming light and darkness, bringing harmony while creating all. That's a poetic translation. Literally, it's, blessed are you, God, our God, sovereign of the universe, who creates light and fashions darkness, making peace and creating everything. Light and dark, peace and everything. Well, light and dark are opposite. Making peace, you'd expect the opposite of peace instead of everything. If you have the Lev Shalem, look at the right-hand margin on page 150. It's the second paragraph down. This is a well-known element, but we should appreciate it today. This bracha is adapted from a verse in the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, which originally, in its own day, the book of the Bible of Isaiah, reads, who makes peace and creates evil. In the Hebrew, it's Yotzer Or V'Rechoshech Haseh Shalom V'Tara. God makes evil? How is that possible that God makes evil? The prophet Isaiah insists that both good and evil come from the one God. But in the moment of prayer, we focus on all for which we can be thankful, beginning with the light that makes life possible. Therefore, the ancient rabbis changed this biblical verse and changed the blessing, the ending, to read, creating all. The rabbis who fashioned what we now call the prayer book were uncomfortable with the sentiment found in the book of Isaiah, that God creates light and dark, peace and evil. And so they changed the word evil when they put it into the prayer book. How would Isaiah justify the message that God is responsible for creating peace and also evil? Isaiah lived in a time 2,700 years ago when there was war and there were threats between an empire known as the Assyrians, not Syria, Assyrians, and northern Israel. And people were suffering, as we all do when there's war. And perhaps that was the influence that led him to say, everything in the universe happens as a function in one way or another of God, even the bad, which is very difficult for us to comprehend. On the other hand, if we say that bad happens separate from God, we're left with saying that something is out there besides God. And I'm thinking about this again because of September 11th and what happened, that almost 3,000 human beings were destroyed by hate, by prejudice against America and what we represent. And of course, in no way is God responsible for that. Lehefech, absolutely opposite. It's people who chose to violate God's supreme expectation, supreme demand to care for life. That's what God cares about. And that's all over our sacred scripture. Turning now to the preamble of the Shema, Ahava Rabbah. The Ahava Rabbah speaks of great love. God, you love us. Look at the last stanza on the English side, page 154, Gathering the Tzitziot. It's safety. Safety is woven into the expression of love, which leads to the Shema. Bring us safely from the four corners of the earth and lead us in dignity to our land. For you are the God who effects deliverance. You have chosen us from all other tongues and peoples, always drawing us nearer to your name, that we may truly acknowledge you and lovingly proclaim your oneness. Baruch atah Adonai, who lovingly cares for the people of Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, habachar b'Yisrael b'Yahava. 155. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'yavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayo hadavarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavacha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha v'valektecha v'derech v'shachbecha v'kumecha u'gishartam la'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'ninecha u'tavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'sharecha. The middle of page 156. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor taber el bnei Yisrael v'martaleim v'sulem tzitzit al kanfei vigdehem l'dorotam v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf petil techelet v'yolachem l'tzitzit וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם. ולא תעתורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו, ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Adonai Elohechem Emet. on page 158. And as I've said on other occasions, it's very meaningful to me for us to have included here on page 158 in the Mi Chamocha the name Miriam. For many centuries, the Tehilot, the introductory line to Mi Chamocha, spoke of Moses. In this modern conservative Siddur, which was fashioned 4, 5, 6 years ago, we incorporate Miriam. Without Miriam, number one, to watch over and tend Moses as a baby in the basket, and number two, to assist in the departure, which we call the Exodus, we wouldn't be who we are today. So we include this woman, and we realize now how much more we have to gain by including all of our people in our entire community of Israel. Tehilot le'eloyon baruch u'mvarach Moshe u'Miriam u'vnei Yisrael l'cha anu shira b'simcha rabba v'amru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh norati lot osef elem Shira Chadasha Shibachu Geulim Lashimcha Sefat Hayam Yachad Kulam Hoduvim Lechu V'Amro Adonai Yimloch Leolam Voed Tzor Yisrael Kuma B'Ezrat Yisrael Uvedech Nemecha Yodava Yisrael Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvot Shemo Kedosh Yisrael. We begin aloud on page 159. And this Shabbat in the center between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur has a special name. It's called Shabbat Shuvah. And you see this here in the small print, the italicized instructions near the bottom of the text of 159. On Shabbat Shuvah we add Zochreinu L'chaim, which we sing on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So the theme on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of being remembered for life percolates into this Amidah. Side note, if anybody is saying any of the prayers during the entire week between the second day of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, days of the week as well, saying the Amidah, incorporate Zochreinu L'chaim. And on page 160, near the bottom, we have Mi Chamocha Av Rachamim Zocher Yitzurav. On Shabbat Shuvah we add, it's the third line up from the bottom of the page. And then during the silent prayer, which is on pages 162, 3, 4, look at page 164, the very bottom, the red ink on Shabbat Shuvah, that's this Shabbos. On Shabbat Shuvah we add Uchtov L'chaim Tovim, Uchsov L'chaim Tovim, which means, and inscribe all the people of your covenant for life. And then we conclude, again in silence on page 165, with B'Sefer Chaim, the bottom stanza. All the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have the same aspiration, that we be inscribed, we and everyone else, inscribed, signed, and according to the words in Ne'ilah, sealed in the book of life, beginning aloud and continuing thereafter in silence. Adonai Sefatai Tiftach Ufi Yagi Tilatecha Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el ha'gadol ha'gibor v'anora el elyon gomel chasadim tovim ve'konei ha'kol ve'zocher chastei avot v'imahot u'mevi goel livnei b'neihem l'man shmo b'yahava Zochreinu l'chaim melech chafetz b'chaim v'chotvenu b'sefer ha'chaim l'mancha Elohim chaim melech ozer p'keid u'mashiach magen Baruch atah Adonai magen Avraham u'p'keid Sarah Tagi borle alamaroi mechayim etim ata rav lahoshia mechalkel chayim bechesed mechayim etim berachamim rabim somech noflim verofech olim omatir asurim omekayim emunato lishenei afar michamocha bal gevurot omidam Melech memit u'mechaye u'matzmiach Yeshua micha mocha v'rachamim zocher yitzurav lechaim berachamim V'ne'eman atalachiyot meitim baruch atah Adonai mechayei hametim. In a moment, we will open the Ark and take out the Torah, but before that, I wish to share a poem. The poet is Bell Downing. Bell Downing. The poem is entitled One. As the soot and dirt and ash rained down, we became one color. As we carried each other down the stairs of the burning building, we became one class. As we lit candles of waiting and hope, we became one generation. As the firefighters and police officers fought their way into the inferno, we became one humanity. As we fell to our knees in prayer for strength, we became one in faith. As we whispered or shouted words of encouragement, we spoke one language. As we gave our blood in lines a mile long, we became one body. As we mourned together the great loss, we became one family. As we cried tears of grief and loss, we became one soul. As we retell with pride of the sacrifice of heroes, we become one people. We are one color, one class, one generation, one humanity, one in faith, one language, one body, one family, one soul, one people. We are the power of one. We are united. We are America. We rise, the ark is opened, Vayehi bin Soah. Vayehi bin Soah ha'aron, vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, ve'yafutzu oivecha, ve'yanusu misanecha, mipanecha, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Odavar Adonai, Mirushalayim, Baruch Shenatan, Torah, Torah, Baruch Shenatan, Torah, Torah, Le'amo Yisrael B'kedushato. A number of years ago, a friend of ours brought these to me, and they were messages of prayer and peace, which were shared with a local fire station in New York City. And this friend asked if we could take care of these prayers. These were copies of the prayers given to members of the firehouse. And I said yes, and I thought, what could be more appropriate than to safeguard these prayers, than to place them in the Aron. So for the past number of years now, these prayers, which are copies of original prayers given to firefighters and their families, have been in our Aron HaKodesh, our holy Aron. And they will remain here.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Adonai, God,
Gadol.
Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai, Tin Ramama Shema Yachdav. L'cha Adonai HaGedula, v'HaGevura, v'Tiferet, v'Hanetzach, v'Hahod, Kicho b'Shamayim u'v'Haaretz, Kicho b'Shamayim u'v'Haaretz. Adonai HaMamlacha, v'Amin Aseh l'chol rosh, Ramemo, Ramemo, Adonai Eloheinu, ve'ishtachavu, ve'ishtachavu, le'ahadam raglav, kadoshu, Ramemo, Ramemo, Adonai Eloheinu, ve'ishtachavu, ve'ishtachavu, le'ahar kodsho, le'ahar kodsho, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Shkoy Gariel. The Torah reading for today is known as Vayelech, Vayelech. And if you have the Chumash, it's found on page 1173, 1173. And if you have a Tanakh, we're in the book of Dvarim, Deuteronomy, Dvarim, chapter 31, chapter 31. And this is the nearly conclusion of Moses' final speech to the people of Israel. The next two passages are the conclusion, and the next two passages, the next two Torah portions, are in poetry. So Moses' farewell address is poetic, which is a very powerful message. It's a powerful way of saying farewell to people whom you love, and we'll talk about that more in the next 2 weeks. But for now, I wish to just draw your attention to an element here in the beginning of this chapter. It's Vayelech, chapter 31 of Devarim, of Deuteronomy. This is the context from where we gain the expression and the idea that 120 years is a perfect age span for a human being. Based upon this, Moses lived to be 120. So you may know the Yiddish, bis vor 120 Jahr, 120 Jahr, 120 years. In the Hebrew, ad mea ve'esrim, until 120. And Jewish people for a long time have been wishing each other, bis vor 120 Jahr, or ad mea ve'esrim, may you live to be 120, in an expression of great honor and affection that halavai, each and every one of us could be in some way almost like Moses. In Israel, there's a cute little modern take on the expression. It's instead of ad mea ve'esrim until 120, it's ad mea ke'esrim. May you live to be 100 and look like and feel like you're 20, which I think is kind of fun. This is Moses, the man who faced off against Pharaoh, the man who led the people through the plagues and out into the wilderness, the man who went up and down at the age of a spry 80 years old, twice on a mountain, schlepping stone tablets with the 10 great words written upon them. The man who led people through numerous battles, taking them from place to place, seeking food and water. The man who established a legislature and a judicial system. The man who cared for every need. The man who talked to God the way you and I talk to each other. And this is Moses. And he recognizes that he's going to die. And most importantly, look at this. It's in this little opening section. It's verse number 3. God will cross over before you, not with you, but before you. And God will destroy all the threatening nations, and you will chase them away. And Joshua is crossing before you, as God said. Moses is first and foremost addressing the needs of the community, not himself. And he knows that they need to be reassured that they have a strong leader to guide them, to assist them. And he points out, and this is a second, third, fourth time, depending upon how you look at it, time that Moses has designated and specified Joshua. Joshua in Hebrew is Yehoshua. So Moshe is about to die, and Yehoshua is going to step into the role. There's not going to be any gap. There's going to be a consistent transition of leadership. And the man who theoretically, we could argue, would be first in line eligible to live forever, recognizes that there are needs greater than his own life, the needs of others. And that brings a lump to my throat and an appreciation of what and who a leader should be. Vayelech Moshe vaydaber et hadvarim ha'ele el kol Yisrael v'yomar lehem b'nei v'esrim shana anochi hayom lo uchal od letzei ve'elavo Parnoi amar elai lo tavor et hayarden hazeh Arnoi Elohecha hu over lefanecha v'yashmid et goyim ha'ele milfanecha v'yirishtam Yoshua over lefanecha kasher diber Adonai. And in a moment, we will do just a little bit of Haftorah study. But first, we wish to offer a Misha Barak, the prayer of healing. And as you know, it is our custom, our practice, to include the names of people whom we love, which are before us. If you have someone whom you wish to incorporate into our prayer, please do so by mentioning that person's name in your home. Misha Barak Chavatenu, obviously, Surah Bachalea, Hurachar Pat Kol HaKolim Ev Kolel Et, Amelia Rose, Bat Amanda Jean, Avram Yehuda Ben Gisha, Bet De Palma, Robin Mayer, Sprinza Bat Bashi, Miriam Bat Bashi, Baruch Ben Imo, Shoshana Bat Mili, Yaakov Avram Ben Chana, Caleb Bat Shoshana, Yudisliba Bat Svega, Tema Bat Dina, David Shlomo Ben Tova, Nachum Uvinyamin, Cherie Singleton, Billy Singleton, Henry Macon, Chana Bat Meredith, Abimoshe Ben Mendel Chana, Thomas Stoney, Debbie Pfeiffer, George Patinos, Mordechai Ben Zelda, George Barton, Monica Knight, LaClaudia Thomas, Elalea Bat Aviva, Lizatara Bat Sarimenu, Mickey Bat Cecilia, Zork Ben Leah, Chanasar Bat Peshalea, Yenta Bat Gisha, Carol Boyce, Betkol Kolmela, Vizikolel Et Kulam, Meherov, Hashmas Namar, Amen. Oh, the one who has healed and answered the prayers of all our ancestors, our mothers and our fathers, to this one we call out on this day, this sacred day of Shabbat and the sacred day of remembrance. Reach forward and touch all the hearts and the bodies and the bones of those who are afflicted, ailing, and injured. Remove their suffering, their pain, their obstacles, and their fear, and assist them to rise once again and move forward in healing, in wholeness, in fulfilling life, a life marked with a new optimism, a new perspective of hope and faith. Favor them with your healing and your touch, O God. Strengthen each and every one, and also bring their families and their loved ones and their caregivers together and in a renewed sense of hope and promise. Answer this prayer and all the many prayers, those of words and those of thought and those of heartfelt need. Sustain all who are suffering, and may their suffering come to an end. May they know peace and strength. And we all say, Amen. Just a little bit of Haftorah, and then we will rise for Hagbah. The Haftorah is found on page 1235. Page 1235 in the back of the Chumash, if you have the Chumash. If not, if you're in the Tanakh, perhaps you have an indicator somewhere of the Haftorah for Shabbat, Shuva, S-H-U-V-A, Shabbat, Shuva. Today's the Shabbat named Shuva, from the first word of this Haftorah. This is a very interesting Haftorah. It's a unique Haftorah in that we have 3 different chunks, 3 different paragraphs, each one drawn from 3 different prophetic books in the Tanakh. And they are stitched together. And I think you'll see why in a minute. The first is on page 1235, and it's from Hosea. Hosea calls out to Israel and he says, Shuva Yisrael, return Israel to God. And he's not talking about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. He's talking about in daily life, you need to become more fulfilled inside yourselves by changing your ways for the better. But when our ancestors began to construct the experience that we call Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and focus on the internal individual process of teshuvah, which means personal inner return, they took hold of this little paragraph of Shuva Yisrael from the book of Hosea, and they said, we're going to sing this, say this, sing this, recite this on the Shabbos between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Turn the page. 1236, chapter 2 from a prophet named Yoel. We know very little about Yoel, and he in English his name is Joel. Yoel, we know very little about Yoel. But listen to this phrase of chapter 2. Tiku shofar b'tzion. Tiku sounds like tekiah, and that means tiku is a verb. Blast the sound. Make a tekiah blast. Sound it. Sound the shofar in Sion. And then it says, Kadshus Tzom, declare and sanctify your fast, Kiru Atzara. Call everybody together to be assembled. And now you understand why. Oh, this paragraph makes sense. We're going to take hold of this and put this in as Haftorah paragraph number 2. Because it sounds like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Blow the horn, have a fast, have everybody come together. And now, turn to page 1239, a small paragraph from the book of Micha. In English, pronounced Micah. In Hebrew, it's Micha. Micha is his name. And Micha speaks about Nosei avon v'ofer fesha, not the exact same words as the famous phrase that we sing, but similar. Nosei avon v'ofer fesha, removing sin and granting forgiveness. And that's why this third paragraph from Micha is placed here. So the 3 different prophetic books from different authors, different authorships, different time periods are all excerpted and brought together. Hosea, Yoel, and Micha to remind us of this season. 1, that it's up to all of us to come together. 2, we need to pay attention to the shofar and to do internal prayer and fasting and gathering, all of which we will be doing. And 3, well, the third part is up to God. God, grant forgiveness. And based upon our coming together and our sincere desire to return and the mental focus during our fasting and our prayers and our silent reflections, God will forgive. And now it's time for Hagba and Galila. V'zot ha'torah asher sam Moshe livnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai biyad Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe, upside down. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Joining me for a prayer for our nation in the Siddur on page 177. The middle and bottom stanzas. Adonai, God whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the many peoples and faiths who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty from our land. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me. And let us say Amen. The prayer for Israel, the top of page 178. Avinu Shabbat Shamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'go'alo, Borech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit, Tzmicha Gulatenu. Avinu Shabbat Shamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, Bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace, its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. Page 184. Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba v'tomcheha me'ushar deracheha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Benashuva Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Gadiel. You may be seated. I have some thoughts to share with you today. It's September 11th. And we all remember those terrifying and unbelievable experiences that we first encountered when we saw those aircraft crashing into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and an airplane being brought down to Shanksville, Pennsylvania by civilians who thought more of us than of their own lives. And it brings lumps to our throats when we think of the loss of nearly 3,000 people, the terrifying inability of people to say farewell to their loved ones, the colossal sorrow because many never even had a chance to have an actual burial, instead conducting funerals with empty caskets. And the wickedness, the cruelty of unchecked hate. 7 years ago, Minette and I had an opportunity to visit the World Trade Center Memorial, Ground Zero, and it occurred to me as we were walking very slowly through this captivating and compelling place that it's not only a memorial, but in a way, it's also a cemetery. Because it's built on the site. And it may well be that the remains of loved ones, in one way or another, are actually within the new grounds, the new plaza, and the construction itself. We're all familiar with what Ground Zero looks like, and I appreciate Gadiel's putting a few images up. And we're going to look at just 2 images for a moment, and then I want to continue on. The first image, of course, is well known. This Ground Zero it needs no introduction. And the second image as well is well known to us. And at one point, we were walking through this vast museum memorial, and we came upon a site where there were a number of computer desks, kiosks, and you could type in a search and find memorials to September 11th throughout the world. Pardon me. And so I put in a search for memorials throughout the United States, and this is the third image here on this map. And you see before you how many memorials there are, of course, throughout the United States. And some may be very large, some may be very small. But how many memorials there are across our nation, and a few in Central and South America as well. And at the same point, you can see, obviously, in Western Europe, there are a number of memorials. In fact, in Poland, there are 4 memorials. 4 memorials in Poland. I had the time to look at 2 and research 2. 2 of them are civilian. It may be that 2 others are not, but 2 of them are civilian. And you see quite a number in Western Europe. And now I want to show you this next map, which we're calling the world map. Gadiel's bringing it up before you. And you see on this world map, looking into Central and Eastern Europe and into Asia, how empty of any indication of concern of humanity lost. For there are almost no indicators of the need to remember what happened on September 11th. Incidentally, in Japan, yes, memorials, they're on U.S. naval bases. And not on this map. There's a memorial to September 11th in Australia. Australia. There's a town which name I did not recognize, but there's a local memorial built by a workers' union in a certain town because it's marking the loss of one of its own in Australia. And now look at this next map, which we've called the Israel and Afghanistan map. And as you see, there are dots in Afghanistan. There are actually 4 memorials in Afghanistan. Well, I can't tell you if they're still there, but up until potentially a month or 2 ago, there were 4. 3 of them on Bagram Air Force Base. And you and I, of course, have no idea what the status is of Bagram Air Force Base, but up until presumably a few weeks, a month, 2 months ago, the 3 memorials to September 11th were still intact on Bagram Air Force Base. And there was an additional memorial to September 11th on the Kabul, Afghanistan airport grounds. And obviously in the past week or 2, we have no idea what's happened to that expression of reverence for life and the need to demonstrate memory and compassion over attacks on civilians. But I would guess that all 4 of those sites in Afghanistan came forth because of Americans, probably American military. It makes sense to say. And now I want you to look at Israel. And in Israel, there are 3 memorials to what happened on September 11th. You saw how many there were in Western Europe and how none exist in Central and Eastern Europe, and there are none in Africa. The entire continent of Africa is empty. Israel has 3 memorials to September 11th. Tiny little Israel. And for the record, remember that Israel is 1/5 the size of the state of Alabama. 20% of the size of the state of Alabama, Israel. 1/5. And there are 3 memorials to September 11th. The first is outside Jerusalem. And you now have a graphic before you. This is in a forested area, in an area known as Ramot. It's on one of the approach roads into the hills, the Judean hills, wherein Jerusalem sits. Look at this flag, fashioned out of steel, and how beautiful it is, and how powerful a message it is that in Jerusalem, Yer HaKodesh, Jerusalem, the holy city, there's a memorial to our people whom we lost. And you can't quite see it in this picture, but from a different vantage point, there are plaques with the names of the souls lost on the attacks on September 11th. The only memorial outside of the United States wherein the names are actually written in Jerusalem. All the other memorials, according to the information that I garnered from this kiosk at the memorial at the World Trade Center's site, all the other memorials around the world, yes, memorialized September 11th, but don't mention the names. But in Jerusalem, all the names of the Americans lost, for that matter, other people as well, are inscribed. And at the base of this flag is a piece of metal from the pile from Ground Zero. Such is the sensitivity of the people of Israel. And now we go to Ashkelon. Pardon me. Ashkelon is a small working class population, perhaps 50,000 people in Ashkelon. It's a small city. And frankly, there's not much to do in Ashkelon. Most people don't go to visit Ashkelon because there's not really anything to see or do. It's just a town, just a plain old city. But in Ashkelon, there's a memorial to September 11th. It's a grove of trees, and there's also a small memorial. Why would the community of Ashkelon have a memorial to September 11th? Because there's something in the hearts and minds of Israel that cares about life, that reveres humanity, that suffers along with us in our suffering. And I want you to remember this grove of palm trees in Ashkelon with a small local memorial to the attacks on September 11th. Now please journey with us to Beersheba. Beersheba is a small southern city in the deep Negev, about 150,000 population, so we'd say smaller than Mobile, give or take. And there's a very well-known university, the Ben Gurion University, which is a leader in desert science and hydrology and other related research. And lately, these past few years, we've been seeing roundabouts constructed to relieve congestion here in Mobile. There's a roundabout in Beersheba. And on this roundabout is a memorial to September 11th. On a roundabout in Beersheba in the desert in the southern part of Israel. And you see two metal structures, two sculptures, which you might consider to be the framework or the skeletons of the Twin Towers. And then a small rounded object, and that's the memorial. But again, you could ask, why would there be a memorial to September 11th on a roundabout in an intersection in Beersheba, Israel? And again I say, because the heritage of our lives, which is Torah, has percolated into the culture of modern Israel, and the reverence for all humanity and the appreciation of life and the need to remember and the need to cherish are built into and wired into our society. And when you look at the world map and you see how many places have ignored the crisis and the extremity of September 11th, and then you look at the map of tiny Israel, 20% the size of the state of Alabama, with 3 different memorials, I hope your breath is taken away. And I hope that within the sorrow which we all share and remember on this day, intermixed with the grief, is pride, nachas in Hebrew and Yiddish, nachas over our people Israel. May we all realize that we are not alone, and there are people who care for us all across the world, yes, and Israel has a special role and a special place in lifting us all up. May we take hold of that, and in the future, when tragically there will be other losses, you and I, as brothers and sisters of this modern Israel, will also need to step forward and share our support with whomever might be suffering. And someday, because of that shared voice of kindness, of humanity, of compassion, of willingness to grieve and lift up and try to walk forward in the future, someday there will be an end to needless attacks and too much hate in the world. Someday. We turn to, pardon me, the Mourner's Kaddish on page 207. On page 207. And on this Shabbat, we remember with great love Minnie A. Miller, Leon Mishkin, Julius Bloom, Ann Wiedenbaum, Abraham Miller, Max Greenberg, Louise Goldrich, Nancy Howell, Lottie Voigt, Eileen Sherman, Sidney Goldrich, Cassily Koppel, Laura Lapkin, Soretta Livitz, Rita Miller, I, Harry Brook, Devora Mary Yablonsky, Esther Novoselsky, Hyman Bronstein, Sylvia Goldberg, Eva Davidoff, Joyce Marcus, Millie Rosenblatt. We remember with sadness the loss of Dr. Gerald Berger, and we extend our condolences to him. We're remembering all those whose lives were taken from us on this day, September 11th. And if you have a name or two which you wish to mention, please do so in your own home at this time. If so inclined, people rise for Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Amen. Be'alma divra chirute, v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'miru. Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam olalmei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei dekudisha b'richu le'ela le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'a miran ba'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shamaya v'chayim oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Remaining standing, please, and if you were not standing for Kaddish, you were asked to rise. The aleinu, turning back to pages 205 and 206. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol latet gedula leotzer breshit shelo asana kugaye aratzot velo samanu k'mishpachot adama shelo sam chelkenu kahem v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech Malchei Hamlachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shehu Noteh Shamayim Yosed Aretz Umoshav Yikaro Bashamayim Mimal Ushchinatu Zo Begave Meromim Hu Eloheinu Enod Emet Malkeinu Efezulato Kakatu B'Torato V'yadata Yom V'ashevota Elavavecha Ki Adonai Hua Elohim Bashamayim Mimal V'al Haaretz Mitachat Enod Kakadu b'Toratecha Adonai yimloch li'olam bo'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yihye Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Remaining standing, we'll make Kiddush and Motzi together if you have a glass of wine. If not, perhaps make that preparation at this moment. Just a few quick reminders. Tonight, 7:30, Zoom Havdalah. Tomorrow, at 1 o'clock, we'll be visiting the cemetery via Zoom. I sent you the link. If you don't have it, contact me tonight after Shabbos, and I'll get it to you. We're doing this on Zoom. I carry my computer around, and we can visit graves of beloved ones. Monday is Tanakh on Zoom. Tuesday, Adult Hebrew on Zoom. Tuesday, Spirit. And the Spirit topic is, how do we understand the Unisana Tokef? What does that mean? How do we address it and deal with it? So that's the Spirit discussion on Tuesday from 5 to 5:30. And that's it, of course, Wednesday and Thursday, Yom Kippur. V'shamero b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asod et ha-Shabbat, l'dorotam brit olam, B'nai Oven B'nai Yisrael Lo Tili Olam Ki Sheshet Yamim Asa Adonai Et HaShamayim V'et Haaretz Uvayom HaShvi Shabbat Vayinafash Hakem Berachranetim B'Shabbat V'Kadsheu Savre Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Borei Pri Hagafen. We'll make motzi in just a minute. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshana b'mitzvot v'tzivana al netilat yadayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Thank you to Gadiel for all of his help with the technology and putting those pictures up on the screen for all of us to see and take hold of. This is a day that we shall always remember and on into the future. We need to make a difference in the world. Oh, I forgot to ask, if you haven't yet brought groceries by for the food drive for Yom Kippur, please bring a bag of groceries by the shul, and we will continue to collect them, and they'll go to the Second Harvest, which is the new name for the Bay Area Food Bank. That's what Yom Kippur is all about, caring about others, and that's how we improve our lives. Know that you are very important to me, and I keep you in my heart constantly, in love and with hope and with all types of prayer. Lihitrot, until we see each other soon, and know that you are a blessing from God here in our world. Good Shabbos.